You probably, when you first came to the subject, had who knows how many questions. Where's the edge? Oh, how
Right.
could they be lying? Why are they lying? All these questions that come to your mind are certainly going to come to your friends and family and everyone on your Facebook timeline's mind. So you better be prepared to answer them.
So let's not beat around the bush, man. To challenge the heliocentric model of the solar system is pretty blasphemous in today's world. So how do we start to unravel some of this stuff? What are some of the biggest red flags with our traditional understanding that should start putting those first cracks in the listener's preconceived notion?
Sure. Well, just our common sense everyday perception of the Earth, it is flat as far as we can tell. It is motionless as far as we can tell. And everything in the sky is revolving around us as far as we can tell. If nobody told us otherwise, we'd logically assume that the Earth was flat, motionless, with everything in the sky revolving around us. And you can prove that this is the case as well, for instance, with the horizon. As you rise up, no matter how high you go on the top of Mount Everest, or if you go in a balloon higher and higher, as far as 20 miles up and higher, we've gotten independent balloons have gone up with cameras. The horizon remains flat all the way around and rises to the eye of the camera all the way up. Now, if the Earth were a ball, no matter how big, the horizon is said to be the curvature of the ball. So as you rose up, the horizon would stay where it was, and you'd have to look down if you're in a hot air balloon, down further and further as you rose up, and the horizon would be below you. But in fact, as high as any non-NASA, RASA, or other Freemasonic space agency has ever shown us, as far as any independent camera has ever gone up with an independent rocket or balloon, as far as 20 miles up, totally flat and rises to the eye of the observer. So that's one proof. Of course, you can measure curvature if it actually existed. They say the ball Earth is 25,000 miles in circumference, and using spherical trigonometry, it figures out to 8 inches of curvature per mile squared. The mile is squared, so for 2 miles, it would be 2 times 2, 4 times 8 inches, 32 inches, and for the third mile, it's 3 squared, which is 3 times 3, 9, times 8 is 72. So you're going 8, 32, 72, 128 inches, and so on. And this is the kind of curvature that would exist on a ball, and specifically on a ball 25,000 miles in circumference, as they say it is. So you can check with theodolites and telescopes and different methods, lasers, to see if the Earth actually does have that curvature. And it's been tested over and over again and found to have no curvature whatsoever. So I mean, even if they had the number wrong and it was 100,000 miles in circumference, there would still be calculable, measurable curvature that just isn't there. The only place curvature exists is in NASA photos and videos, and those can be proven to be CGI fakes, and the early ones were literally taken through a round window to make the Earth appear round. And that's it. It's just photo trickery and brainwashing that's got the world thinking that we're on a ball spinning around the sun with a magical force called gravity holding us on the underside of this spinning ball. It's all just brainwashing that we've received. It's pseudoscience accepted as legit science, but real science has confirmed geocentricity in the flat Earth for thousands of years. The flat Earth was known to ancient cultures all over the world for thousands of years, and it's actually a relatively recent phenomenon that people have been believing we're on a big ball spinning around the sun. Pythagoras first came up with it about 2,500 years ago. He's also often considered the first Freemason, and it didn't go anywhere much from there until 2,000 years later. Copernicus picked up where he left off, another Jesuit Freemason, and he really picked things up, and Kepler and Galileo and Newton, and now Einstein and NASA, Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson, all these people, they're all part of this Freemasonic club that is building a pseudo-scientific worldview to indoctrinate the slave class.
Yeah, Yeah, right. I think you make a lot of great points, man. And I think the curvature argument is pretty damn strong. And I pulled this off your website in the comments section because, to your credit, you spend a lot of time writing thorough answers to questions and responses to critics. And that's where a lot of my questions got answered. And so here's a little more detail about the curvature argument from your site. It seems like lighthouses are one great example. This first one you have is the Isle of Wight Lighthouse in England. It's 180 feet high and can be seen up to 42 miles away, a distance at which modern astronomers say the light should fall 996 feet below the line of sight. Why can you still see it? And then you have several other good examples in the lighthouse department, but another one worth mentioning that people be familiar with is the Statue of Liberty. It stands 326 feet above sea level, and on a clear day can be seen as far as 60 miles away. Now, if the Earth was a globe at the dimensions that they give us, that would put Lady Liberty at an impossible 2,074 feet below the horizon. These examples seem hard to rectify unless there's some obvious answer that I'm missing, but I would say this is a pretty compelling thread of evidence, my man.
Yeah, the distance at which the light from lighthouses can be seen at sea is just way too far for the Earth to be a ball 25,000 miles in circumference. Another great example is the Notre Dame Antwerp spire, standing 403 feet high from the foot of the tower, with Strasbourg measuring 468 feet above sea level. And so with the aid of a telescope, ships can be seen on the horizon, and captains declare they can see the spire from an amazing 150 miles away. If the Earth were a globe, however, at that distance, the spire should be an entire mile, 5,280 feet below the horizon. Another one is just the natural physics of water. It's the natural physics of water to find and remain at level. If water is dammed up and then released, it will flow out in all directions until it becomes level again. But on a spinning ball Earth, we would have to have oceans that were hundreds of miles of curved water. And this is impossible. I mean, they can't show you any example of this happening, but they claim this is what's happening on the Earth.
Water always finds its level, whether it's in a glass, whether it's in a bathtub, whether it's in a swimming pool, whether it's in a lake, whether it's an ocean. Water is always level. That's why we use water as a leveling tool. Nowadays we have lasers, so you can check again, and the laser will level out over the water. The horizon is always flat. And not only is it flat, 360 degrees around you, no matter how high you rise, it rises with you, because it's the law of perspective we were talking about, and not the curvature of a ball. If the horizon was the curvature of the ball Earth, as you've been taught, then as you rose above it, no matter how big that ball was, it could be 1,000,000 times bigger than they say the Earth is. If it's a ball, it will curve away from you. And as you rise up, you would have to tilt your head and look down further and further to be able to see that horizon. But you'll never look down to the horizon on our Earth. It will always rise up right with you. And as you turn around, it'll be 360 degrees flat and at eye level, unless you're recording with a GoPro camera. And then it will change to convex and concave depending on the dip and the tilt of the camera, because it's a wide angle lens. This is what the Red Bull dive used on their outside camera. At 128,000 feet, you can see the curve of the Earth, which was the exact same curve of the Earth if you watch right from the liftoff. When they started, the Earth was already curving that exact amount because it's just a wide angle lens. And then as they go up 128,000 feet, horizon's still there, and then the inside camera gives it away, which was not a wide angle lens. As they open the door, parallel, right at eye level, the horizon was totally flat. And then when they go to the outside camera, boom, curved just like that.
But the sun, moon, stars, all the celestial bodies rotate around us. And this has been proven too. Since the 1800s, they've done experiments. You can look up Airy's failure is one. George Airy put water in a telescope to slow down the starlight coming in, and comparing it with control telescopes, you're able to see whether it's the starlight that's moving over us relative to a stationary Earth, or is it the moving Earth rotating under a relatively stationary star. And this and many other experiments by Michelson, Morley, Gale, Sagnac, and some others in that time prove proved that the celestial objects in the sky are all revolving around us, and we're completely still.
Samuel Rowbotham did a bunch of experiments for over 30 years, wrote a bunch of books, and did lectures all over Europe talking about the flat Earth and exposing the heliocentric theory. He wrote a book called Zetetic Astronomy. William Carpenter wrote a book called 100 Proofs the Earth is Not a Globe.
What year was that?
That was also late 1800s, around 1890s. The Rowbotham book was first published in the 1860s. He did experiments over water, seeing if water was convex or flat, used theodolites, telescopes, flags, spirit levels, sextants, used different instruments to record that the supposed curvature of a ball Earth, 25,000 miles in circumference, should be 8 inches per mile when you square the mile. So spherical trigonometry, as you drop off on a ball, the drop gets bigger and bigger as you go. So in, say, a 6-mile channel at the Bedford level where he did some experiments, depending on where you measure the curve from, that would make a 6-foot-high dip in a 6-foot-high peak and a 6-foot dips on either end. Or if you measure from here, it would be 16 feet going down. And he did different experiments to show that there's not even an inch of curvature. So, I mean, and there's many experiments that have been done since then to prove that, the curvature would be visible at sea level even. You go to the beach and you see totally flat beach horizon and you think, well, the Earth's just really big. I wouldn't be able to see it. But you can see from the left side of your periphery as far as you can go to the right side of your periphery as far as you can go, which is actually at least twice as far as the horizon is straight in front of you, which they tell you is the curve of the ball Earth. So that's another way you can know that it's not the curve of the ball Earth, because you can see right and left of you twice the distance, and that's not curving away. So how could half that distance supposedly be curving away?
Since then, we've had planes that can prove even further that the Earth is stationary. Helicopters as well. You'd think if the Earth was revolving under us, you could just hover up in a helicopter and the Earth would revolve underneath, and then you could land when your destination got to you. But of course, they tell us that the magic of gravity holds the atmosphere to the spinning ball too, and so, relatively speaking, you're moving with the ball. Okay, but they've done experiments with projectile cannons as well as planes taking off in all cardinal directions, and if the Earth was spinning 1,000 miles per hour eastward, as they say, and the average commercial airliner goes about 500 miles per hour, your eastward destinations should come up behind you long before you ever reach them. I mean, here's a good question. Why don't pilots catch on to this fact? If the Earth was truly a sphere, 25,000 miles in circumference, curvating 8 inches per mile squared, a pilot who wanted to simply maintain their altitude at a typical cruising speed of 500 miles per hour would have to constantly dip their nose downwards and descend 2,777 feet over half a mile every minute. Otherwise, without this compensation, in an hour's time, the pilot would find themselves 166,666 feet, 31.5 miles higher than expected. You just end up flying off into outer space if you weren't constantly dipping your nose down to fly around the ball. And so, like I said, if at the typical cruising speed of most planes, you'd have to be descending a half a mile every single minute. And this never happens. I've talked to pilots. Once you get to your cruising altitude, the artificial horizon maintains level. It don't touch the controls, just keeps on going. And so, I mean, the reason pilots don't figure, I'm sure some pilots figure it out, and then who are they going to tell? But I mean, they're just like everyone else. Everyone else is so brainwashed that they don't think of it. And if they do, I've even heard some explanations. They claim that, they say the atmosphere, they say the Earth is spinning over 1,000 miles per hour, and that the atmosphere is also dragged along with it. So then, if some pilot says, hey, why don't I have to course correct downwards all the time? Their explanation is that this atmosphere that's being magically dragged with the spinning ball Earth also magically course correct planes so that they stay at exactly the same altitude because they're in that atmosphere, that magical atmosphere that helps you curve around the ball Earth, man. They've got explanations for everything.
Mm-hmm. And we're told that the Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles per hour, which is awfully fast, but yet, let's say a helicopter cannot just hover in the air for 12 hours, start in St. Louis, Missouri, hover for 12 hours, and land in China with the Earth spinning below it. And that is what, I would first think would be the situation. But then we're told because we're in the sphere, it all moves moves relative to itself, and you don't notice those changes. And see, I'm not a physicist, I'm not a pilot, and so it's hard for me to really play devil's advocate for their position. But I think about if you're in a speeding car going 90 miles an hour down the highway, you can play catch with the passenger, and it feels like you're stationary. Or like if an ant is crawling around on your dashboard, whether it's going with the grain of the car or against, it doesn't really notice that effect. So it's like, I guess I would think that the atmosphere would have the same effect as the encapsulation of that vehicle moving at a fast speed. To the people inside of it, they don't notice. And I guess that's the argument. But do you find flaws with that argument?
Yeah, because once again, it's explaining away your common sense and your experience, which is that you're not moving whatsoever. And so they say, yes, you are moving, silly, but you're just moving at such a constant velocity that you don't notice it whatsoever. Now, even if you're in the best Rolls Royce over the best tar, smoothly going, you close your eyes, I can still tell I'm moving, and that's not going 1,000 miles per hour, that's just going 50 or whatever we're talking about here. Even in an elevator, just an elevator going up, I can feel that. I have a really sensitive stomach, so I mean, I can tell, and I get sick if I'm doing some sort of motion, that anything on par with what the Earth is supposedly doing. And so isn't that weird that just because it's a perfect constant velocity, that my stomach's able to handle that, but just a little bit of a elevator malfunction, and then I'm ready to, So these things don't make any sense. They just want to explain away your common sense with these kind of arguments. And like you said, if you were in a helicopter, you should be able to just go up, wait for the ball Earth to spin underneath you, and land at your destination. But of course, the atmosphere spins with the ball Earth, so that doesn't happen. But we can prove that that's not the case either, because now we have airplanes, which you can go easterly or westerly, and if the Earth and the atmosphere are spinning 1,000 miles per hour east all the time, as they say, then a westbound plane should be, an eastbound plane should never reach its destination. If it was going 500 miles per hour and the Earth is spinning and the atmosphere is spinning 1,000 miles, your destination should come up behind you before you ever reach it, right? And then destinations going the opposite way are going to take far, far longer than they do. You can check flight times, and they're always within a half hour, a couple hours, no matter what direction you're going to or from. But if the Earth was actually spinning at the rate that they say it was, flight times would be totally different.
It makes sense, but yet I've been taught from an early age not to trust myself because they've got it on lock, so I just assume that the physics all kind of works out. But I know there are people who go to school for physics. They study it for years and years, and it's just odd that none of them ever catch on to it. That I guess that guys like Newton created this entire fake science around a fake model, and yet all the math checks out. That's a little hard for me to rectify.
Oh, they're counting on that. That's why they've got all these huge formulas and calculations for gravity and whatnot that are based on nothing. So they've got a weight for the ball Earth, all based on their gravity calculations, and you can Wikipedia it, and you'll see pages of mathematic language that makes no sense to 99.9% of the population, but apparently the math works out, so it's real, right? So it's just another way, just like the CGI images or whatever. Some people are fooled by the images, some people are fooled by the math, some people are fooled by this or that. They've got many different ways to get us in their grips. Like you said, the whole education system is teaching us not to believe our senses, and that word belief is pretty interesting when you look at this, because you say, I believe that we're on a flat Earth, but in fact I see that I'm on a flat Earth, and I feel that I'm on a motionless Earth, and I see that everything in the sky revolves around me. I also see that the sun and the moon are the same size, but I've been brainwashed to believe something very different from what I see. I've been brainwashed to believe that the completely flat horizon that I always see curves at some point. I've been brainwashed to believe that the motionless Earth that I feel beneath my feet is actually spinning at 1,000 miles per hour. I've also been brainwashed to believe that the stars, sun, and moon that clearly spin overhead are actually, some of them we're spinning around, and there's this big spiral motion of planets and galaxies all spiraling, as NASA has told us. They also tell us that the sun is a big ball of burning light, and it's 400 times further away and 400 times bigger than the moon. Yet when I look out in the sky, I can see them to be both the same size. So, in fact, what we believe nowadays is based on something contrary to our common sense and experience, and actually comes from philosophers like Aristotle giving us supposed proofs of a ball Earth, and NASA, Photoshop, CGI divisions giving us fake pictures, making us believe otherwise. But if we were just given to our own devices, everybody would be a flat earther, because that's how it is. It's flat, it's motionless, everything in the sky revolves around us, and that common sense perspective actually has been experimentally proven as well, many, many ways. My book has over 200 proofs. There's a book in the 1800s called 100 Proofs the Earth is Not a Globe.
I wonder if we called a railroad, the actual rails, the manufacturer, if we asked them, do you factor in the curvature of the Earth when you make them? And the answer is no.
No, they don't. Canals, tunnels, railways, they do not have bridges. They don't have to factor in the curvature of the Earth. What bridges, the Golden Gate or the Punch Lane Bridge, I heard people say that, they say they factored in 2 inches for the curvature of the Earth. That's one of the only ones I've ever heard people claim that they factored in curvature. But even the Suez Canal and all these different canals, railways, they admit that there's no allowance given for curvature. There's quotes in flat Earth books for centuries from surveyors and engineers attesting to this. So, and of course that 2-inch one is a joke because the bridge is so long that the actual supposed curvature on their 25,000 mile circumference ball Earth would be, I can't remember now, but many, many, many feet and not just 2 inches. So they can't even get their fake math right when they try to pretend that they factor in curvature.
The United States looks so much bigger now. Africa looks so much smaller now. What's happening? Are the tectonic plates changing so much that when we take pictures now, the land mass has changed, or is it just pure CGI all along?
That's a good one. Yeah, the tectonic changes are causing the CGI pictures to become very different as the years go on. That's a good point. Take a look at these images coming from NASA and RASA and JAXA and all these different space agencies, the Chinese, the Japanese. Some of these are even worse than NASA, and you'll notice how clearly fake they are, how obviously Photoshop CGI they are. And when you compare them to one another, you'll notice these impossibilities, like the water always being different shades of blue every single picture, the size of continents changing from picture to picture, one time North America filling up the entire picture, one time it being just a tiny little speck on the upper part. You'll have on the animations, you'll notice that the clouds almost never move. You'll see a spinning ball Earth with the exact same cloud formations for 24 hours. Take a look at these anomalies, not only on the pictures of the Earth, but on the pictures of the moon, because we've never been to the moon either. NASA's moon landing hoax is all about going far enough away, supposedly, that they could turn around and take a picture of this spinning ball Earth they've been talking about for 450 years and say, hey, we were right, look at that. And the raging debate that had been going on since the late 1800s from Samuel Rowbotham and the other flat earthers then was almost in an instant put to rest by this so-called photographic evidence in an age where most people believed we went to the moon because they heard it on the radio. Nowadays, we have computers, we have Photoshop, we can see these things. You can see anomalies in the original NASA images just by putting them into Photoshop. For instance, you will see many of the images of Earth supposedly taken from the moon have artifacts, rectangular artifacts around the Earth directly embedded in the image, proving that the image of the Earth was actually cut and pasted in a computer program and put there that way. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a rectangular splotch of blackness around the Earth in space. There's also images where you can see the shadow of a ceiling above the rover as it's taking off from the moon, because it's simply being lifted by a crane overhead in a studio. Many of these things, these have all been exposed. This is common knowledge amongst us educated conspiracy folk that you like to ridicule and laugh at and call stupid flat earthers. But this is just a fact.
But they're all fake images. There is no actual image of a ball Earth. If you Google it, you'll see that they're all composites, CGI, or literally taken through a round window in low Earth orbit. That's how they faked the first ones.
Eric, how do you know that they're composite? How do you know that they're not real photos?
Well, I actually admit that they're composite. Composite's their word, not mine, for their fake pictures. They say that there's satellites out there taking satellite images, and these satellite images, they receive ribbons of imagery, they call them, and then they have to extrapolate the ribbons of imagery out in Photoshop, and they admit it. So they can't apparently just take a photo or take some video out there from their satellites. The technology they use, they claim, is can only make a picture for us if they composite it and edit it in Photoshop. So
really?
They've got
Wow.
in one of my videos I've got a NASA guy talking about it, just admitting it straight out. He's like, yeah, well, they are Photoshopped, but they have to be.
Simmons' job is...
It's primarily taking data and making pictures out of it.
That's what this is. A composite of data sets from several different instruments translated into a picture.
In between each orbit.
So some of those are painted on.
It is Photoshop, but it's has to be.
Yeah. Well, and they also say that there's an International Space Station out there, and there's a Hubble telescope floating out there taking wonderful CGI Photoshop pictures that they send us back with their amazing 400-mile outer space internet connection to the Hubble Space Telescope. And now the internet space connection has gone to over 1 million miles with the new Rosetta mission. Have you seen that one? Mm-hmm. The CGI Photoshop pictures from that are just wonderful and well worth the billions of dollars we're spending to get them. Yeah, so the illusion is that there's a space station and satellites and telescopes just floating out there in infinite space. But you and I know that no matter how high you go, you come right back down. Whatever goes up must come down. The illusion is that at some point, if you go high enough, this gravity they claim exists that pulls you back down to the Earth, suddenly just you pop out of it and into the vacuum of space. Now, the vacuum of space can't exist because it's connected to the non-vacuum of the atmosphere in Earth and all the other supposed planets that exist. So a vacuum must be a closed system, but they claim space is a vacuum and space is an open system. So it's philosophically impossible for space to be a vacuum. And the way that they fool us into thinking that this actually is plausible is threefold. First way they do it is in zero-G planes, which are Boeing 737s that do parabolic maneuvers that have a free fall illusion, a free fall effect rather, that happens for about a minute, where you can be floating in these planes, and that's how they get this outer space look, like you're floating in outer space. The second way is through wires, harnesses, and green screen for the longer shots. In the ISS, for instance, they do that. And the third way, for like the outside shots they do, are in pools. They're actually underwater, and this is confirmed by the fact that there's bubbles rising in the pool in a lot of their shots. And people on YouTube have dissected a lot of the ISS and other supposed space footage and all the space bubbles that are coming out of their helmets. Some people are even wearing scuba gear. They found that as well. So that they fake these zero-G illusions by being in water, by being in zero-G planes, and by being in harnesses in front of a green screen. And that makes us think that it's possible that out there in space you could just be kind of floating around like they show us in the movies. But as far as we'll ever know, as far as you or I would ever know, we go as high as we can in a plane or a balloon or a rocket, and we come right back down. Even the rockets they send up, if you're honest about it, you'll notice that they don't go go straight up. All their rockets start a parabolic curve. They start to arc over, and the ones they claim are successful are the ones that go out of view before they come all the way back down. And if anybody asks, why do they always curve over like that? They just say that they're going around the curvature of the ball Earth, and they'll reach escape velocity soon. And at some point, they'll just pop right out of the gravity, and then they'll be floating, which is another problem, because if you were in a vacuum and you were using rocket thrusters or anything to thrust yourself forward, you wouldn't go forward or in any direction you wanted to. You just spin wildly out of control like a gyroscope in 360 degrees in 3 dimensions, spinning wildly. You don't go anywhere that way. So the whole idea of space travel is a big joke. It's all science fiction.
You can't land on the moon. There's nothing to land on. It's just a light. And I can prove it to you right now. Go out on any afternoon and look at the moon. You'll see the blue of the sky through the part of the moon that isn't illuminated, proving that it couldn't be a solid sphere to land something on, but that it's just a light and you can see through it. People have photographed stars through the moon. You can see the blue of the sky through the moon during any waxing and waning cycle. You can see for yourself that it's a light, and it's casting its own light, unlike they tell us that it's a reflector of the sun's light. You can prove that its light is different from the sun's light. It's cold. If you take a thermometer and put it in the shade and another thermometer and put it in the direct moonlight, it's actually colder in direct moonlight, and the thermometer will go up in the shade, the exact opposite of the sun. It's like the yin-yang. If you picture the yin-yang symbolism in Chinese astrology, it's the sun and the moon circling around and over the flat earth. The yin and yang is everywhere in nature. In fact, the male, female, inhale, exhale, good, evil, up, down. But they do away with these things. They say there is no up and down, that everything's just relative. They say there is no good and evil, that they're all about moral relativity. They say there is no sun and moon yin-yang aspect, because the sun is actually really, really big and really, really far away, and the moon is really small but a bit closer. And from our faulty perspective, it just looks like they're exactly the same size in the sky. Once again, Masonic magicians lying to you so that you don't believe your own eyes, which tell you that the sun and the moon are equal, divine, balanced opposites in the sky, revolving over and around us, keeping time like a celestial clock and calendar.
And when you go to see the original, NASA has lost all the original Apollo moon landing footage and telemetry data. So to try and verify the original footage or the data that's in the modules that supposedly went to and from the moon, you can't check those now. So there's no physical confirmable evidence that they were anywhere but a sound studio.
Yeah, and I want the audience to understand what you just said. Folks, what Eric is saying, that the most heralded, most famous accomplishment of mankind, of humans, the landing on the moon, NASA lost everything.
Oops, $30 billion. Sorry.
They're claiming there's nothing in their archives, nothing in storage, nothing in a cardboard box someplace that has anything to do with the Apollo missions. It's all gone. So I know that's probably going to sound very, very bizarre to a lot of people, but you can do your own research and do your homework, and that's what you're going to find has happened and is what they're saying. It's truly amazing.
It's complete camera trickery. This is how they get people to believe in the ball Earth, is just using GoPro cameras. Zero-G planes are these planes that do parabolic maneuvers. The Vomit Comet you might have heard of, where you're able to be weightless. This is how they fake inside shots of the ISS. Outside shots of the ISS, they fake in dark pools, like the Neutral Buoyancy Lab at NASA, where they admit that they practice for their spacewalks underwater. And people like Luca Parmitano have been sent to the emergency room when he was supposedly in outer space because water started leaking into his helmet. And so there had to be explanations to the hospital staff and his family and everyone else as to how that could friggin' be possible. Well, it's because outer space is underwater as far as exterior shots. Interior shots are done on zero-G planes and with green screens and wires. You can even see the harnesses they use to act like they're floating oftentimes in their longer ISS shots. So it's all camera trickery, Hollywood techniques that have got people believing in the spinning ball.
Yeah, the Martian landscape looks incredibly like the hills of Arizona or Australia
Right.
or Ireland. Yeah, and if you just remove the red tint that's been added to these pictures in Photoshop, you'll see it looks exactly like the Earth. And it's just been After Effects to make it look kind of alien, as they do. But yeah, all the Mars rover shots, I mean, some of them are just straight up animations. They're not even video. The video are all filmed here on Earth, just like the moon supposed landings. You can see that they use the exact same backgrounds over and over and over again on the different missions, and on the same missions where they say that, oh, today we're 5 miles from where we were yesterday, and then you line up the mountains and the hills in the background, and they match exactly. They overlay perfectly, showing that they're in a relatively small studio, having to use the same backdrops over and over again, but shooting them from different angles and from different distances to try and give the illusion that they've covered great distances on the moon. But again, with your third eye and a little bit of physical evidence, putting them next to each other, the angles, ups and downs of the mountains and hills trace each other exactly. Just like the gravity on the moon, which is supposedly 1/6 of the fake gravity here on Earth, causing the astronauts to move in that slow, floaty type of way. When you speed the footage up to 2 times, you see that they're in regular, normal atmosphere gravity, whatever you want to call it, and they're just bouncing along or in their little buggy going along, kicking up dust at the exact same rate it would here on Earth. They've just slowed it down in post-production to make you think it's more alien again, just like the red tint in the Martian photos.
But in reality, what goes up must come down. There is no point where you can just go up in a rocket and suddenly pop out into the nothingness, the vacuum of infinite space, they call it, which is a paradox if I've ever heard one. How can there be a vacuum in infinite space when it's adjacent to an atmosphere and not separated in any way? You can't have a vacuum. And how does gravity pull you back to the Earth but then get less and less to the point that you float? How does that happen? And they say that the atmosphere is spinning because the gravity is sticking it to it. So if you figure that, the Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles per hour, but then as you go up higher and higher, the atmosphere must be spinning even faster because it's further away from the point of the center of rotation. So as you're going up in your rocket, you're going through layer after layer of constantly faster and faster spinning atmosphere hitting your rocket until finally you pop out into non-spinning vacuum of infinite space, says NASA. Interesting that we all buy this and just accept this, even though it's physically and philosophically impossible. We just watch a little CGI image and a little camera trickery. You splice a rocket launch together with something else, and then you think that they're in outer space. But again, if you use your eyes and you watch those rockets, you'll see that they don't go straight up. Every single rocket forms a parabolic curve, just like every amateur rocket, just like any projectile that you would send up. It couldn't just go straight up and keep on going until you go into outer space. It comes right back down. So, but what does NASA tell you when you ask them the question, well, why is there a parabola formed by all of your rockets? Well, that's because it's going to spin around the ball Earth before it reaches escape velocity, and then it will go out into outer space from there. Right. As far as gravity is concerned, gravity is simply density, and the knighted Freemason Sir Isaac Newton changed density to gravity using the heliocentric model. So instead of things falling down, they are sucked into the center of massive objects. So what we see is that dense, heavy things fall down and light things rise up. So in nature, something suspended in a medium will rise or fall based on its relative density. Now they're trying to say that that's gravity, and gravity is this magnetic-like force which pulls things into the center of large masses. And so this is how they're changing science, changing the terminology to fit in with their ball model. And with their ball model, there is no up and down anymore. So they say space is infinite, up and down is completely relative, speed is relative, like you were just saying in the train example, all motion is relative. So by using these, and that's what Einstein's whole theory of relativity is explaining away your common sense.
they use these kind of explanations to say that you can't know what up is, you can't know what down is, you can't know where the center or the edge of the universe is. And then they claim that there's a force called gravity that holds these oceans in just so, that it's strong enough to hold the oceans in, but weak enough to allow, bugs to take off and smoke to rise out a chimney. So the magical force of gravity, which was created by a knighted Freemason, Sir Isaac Newton, is basically their go-to answer that explains away anything they have a problem with. Gravity is what they say caused the Big Bang somehow. Gravity is what formed the planets and the sun. Gravity is what causes the planets to orbit around the sun and moons to orbit around planets. Gravity is what causes the water to stick to the planets. Gravity is what causes the tides from the moon. You name it, gravity does it, as far as they're concerned. Yeah, they can't even give you an example of an object so massive that by virtue of its mass alone causes other objects to stick to or orbit around it, as they claim gravity does. And they can't even get that straight. What is it that gravity does here? Does it keep us stuck to the Earth? It pulls things and sticks them there? Or, like they say the moon does, it causes it to orbit in a perpetual circular motion around the Earth. So what is this gravity? I mean, if they want it to, it causes things to stick to it. If they want it to, it causes other things to orbit around it. When they want it to, it causes the Earth tides to be lifted by the moon, they say. But not all of Earth's water. No, just the oceans. All the lake, ponds, and inland waters, those are completely unaffected. But the moon lifts the tides, sure. And gravity is why spherical planets exist in the first place, because it causes everything to tend towards a vortex, and the planets and everything spun into their current shape. That's what they say. And it all came about because of a godless, random, Big Bang cosmic accident, and through chance evolution of a blind, dumb universe, animals and humans and the diversity and complexity of nature just randomly came into existence from their non-God science explanation that they're trying to get everyone to buy into with this whole heliocentric spinning ball Earth mythos we've been fed for the past 500 years.
So gravity is a total subterfuge of the natural laws of density. So people want you to believe that before Isaac Newton lived and an apple dropped on his head, nobody in the world had ever thought of or been able to explain why stuff falls down. The reason that objects fall down is because they are denser than the medium that they are in. And the reason that an object would rise up is because that object is less dense than the medium it is in. So, for instance, that's why a raindrop falls down through the air and an air bubble rises up in the water. That's why a rock would fall down, but a helium balloon would rise up. It's not because gravity has an affinity for rocks and doesn't like balloons. It's because of density. It's all because of relative density. If you take a deep breath and you submerge yourself in water, you'll stay at the surface because you've just changed the density of your body. And if you exhale that breath, you're going to start to sink because you've just changed the density of your body. Gravity didn't just decide that it's got more of an affinity now and it's going to sucking you down to the bottom of the ocean. All about density. So gravity is just complete bullshit that Isaac Newton made up so that Copernicus's spinning ball model would make any sense. And they said, oh, well, the reason things fall down is because there's this sucking force that pulls you to the center of massive objects. And of course, if that was the case, then we would be like magnetized to the Earth, and just stepping your foot off of the Earth would be like taking a heavy magnet off of a refrigerator, and stepping back would be like putting it back down again. And of course, they don't have a single example of any mass, by virtue of its mass alone, causing some other smaller mass to spin circles around or to stick to that mass because of its gravity. They say gravity just spontaneously happens when something's massive enough, and then non-massive things will either start spinning around it, like the planets, if that's what they want it to do, or they'll stick to it, like people, buildings, and the oceans, if that's what they want it to do. So gravity is their mythical magic force that causes us to stick stick to the mythical magic spinning ball Earth, when in reality, it's simple science. The natural physics of density and buoyancy determine that heavy things fall down and light things rise up. And they've been teaching us this crap in school since we're like 7 years old, so that we'll believe that oceans and buildings and people in Australia won't fall off the bottom of a ball.
All right, what is, if the Earth is flat, we can't show people visuals, but give us a mental picture. What does this plate look like that we're all riding around on, or standing on, rather? It's stationary.
Sure.
What does it look like, this plate?
The azimuthal equidistant projection map that the USGS actually uses is the flat Earth map. The UN logo is another example of it. The UN logo is actually a flat Earth map divided into 33 Masonic sections, by the way. But you can just type in flat Earth map on Google, and it's a disc shape. The North Pole is in the center. All the continents go out from there. And Antarctica, instead of being a ice continent on the bottom of the globe, actually surrounds us 360 degrees. And how far that ice goes outwards is unknown at this point. So there's a cover-up. That's what the Antarctic Treaty is all about. That's why you can't independently explore Antarctica. And when people like Jarl Anderhoy try to go down there, they get turned away at gunpoint and put in prison. So there's a big cover-up there in Antarctica as well. I don't know how far the ice goes, whether there's an edge, a barrier, a dome, or infinite plane. But what we do know is that the Earth and the water is completely flat for as far as we can see and as far as we've measured. And the horizon is completely flat as far up as we go. All amateur rockets and all amateur balloons sent up over 20 miles, as high as they can go. The horizon is flat all the way around, and it rises to the camera all the way up. Rises to the level of the camera. Now, this is totally impossible on a ball, no matter how big the ball was. As you rise up, you have to look down to see the curvature, look down to see the horizon. But what actually happens if you go up in a hot air balloon, the horizon rises right on up with you, the whole way up. Just keeps on coming up at eye level, as high as you're going to go. That's just impossible on a ball. If you think about it, if you're on a ball and you were in a hot air balloon or an airplane, you should not be able to see out your window, straight out your window, the horizon. You should have to look down, further and further down, the higher you ascend, to be able to see that horizon. But you'll never look down to the horizon on the Earth. It will always rise up to your level. So why is the UN, the USGS, why are these official organizations using a flat Earth map as their official map? Why does NASA admit to using geocentric calculations for their rocket launches? Why is the official 1892 map, Gleason's, a flat Earth map? You can check it out. People have found it in the Boston Library and other libraries. There's plenty of flat Earth maps. Mercator, the guy that gave us our projection map that we use in schools today, his 1569 map is a flat Earth map, showing the North Pole being a magnetic mountain, something that is never shown nowadays in our maps. They just say the North Pole is a bunch of ice in the middle of an Arctic sea. In his map, it shows that there's these whole island continents around the North Pole that don't exist on modern maps. And there's a magnetic mountain right at the middle. That doesn't exist on any map nowadays. So there's some interesting secrets in historic cartography if you look back at ancient maps. In fact, pretty much every map before the 1500s was a flat Earth map. This ball globe deception, this idea that we're on a ball, it's only been around for the past 500 years or so. Before that, pretty much every map in existence was a flat Earth map.
Now, a lot of people's first question is going to be, well, where's the edge? And I was surprised to see how easy that is to rectify, but I'm sure you get that a lot. How do you tell people when they come at you with, well, where's the edge? Why aren't people sailing off the edge or whatever?
So in the flat Earth model, the North Pole is in the middle, and the Earth is a disk shape, and the Antarctica is all the way around, holding the oceans in. And so it's a fact, if you're at the North Pole and you go south, no matter which, actually it doesn't matter where you are, if you go south, eventually you're going to end up in Antarctica. But on the ball model, it's just a little ice continent underneath the ball. Yet in this model, it's all the way around you, holding the oceans in. As for whether there's an edge beyond beyond the Antarctic ice plateau, this wall that holds everything in is about 100 to 200 feet tall. And once you climb up on the ice wall, it's a plateau of snow that just goes on and on and on. And the public and myself are ignorant at the moment as to whether there is an edge at some point, whether there'd be a barrier, a dome, as many ancient cultures have said there is, or whether it's an infinite flat plain and it's just snow, ice, wind, and darkness forever. So that's still a mystery, how the ice actually terminates. But it is a fact that if you travel south from anywhere on Earth, you will end up at the Antarctic ice wall. The lie is that there's a South Pole, and they've put a ceremonial red and white barbershop pole with a ball Earth on top of it at an arbitrary point along the Antarctic ice. And they even admit that it's not the actual South Pole. And they have this complex model how the North and South Poles on the ball Earth are constantly moving because of the nature of the molten magnetic core of the ball Earth they claim exists. But the real reason is they have guided tours there to the South Pole, and if you took a compass and you stood at their ceremonial pole, you should be able to walk in a circle and north would be in every direction. But of course that wouldn't happen, and so they'd have to answer to all these tourists every year as to why the South Pole clearly isn't the South Pole. That's right, yeah. People like Jarl Anderhoy have been turned away when you try to just go there on your own without one of their pre-approved tour groups. They will turn you away at gunpoint, fine you, and put you in jail. They don't take kindly to that at all. And yeah, they don't want you to expose the hoax. There's a UN treaty that's been going on since the 50s there, so they don't let anyone in there other than their pre-approved guided tours that they take people to the fake South Pole. So they tell us that this spinning ball Earth model is that the magnetism of the ball Earth happens from the molten metal core in the middle of the ball, and it causes the geomagnetic poles to constantly shift. So the North and South Poles are constantly moving. So this is their perfect excuse that they can give for when people go to the South Pole and break out a compass and see that North isn't in every direction as they go around the pole. They can just say, oh, well, the pole's constantly moving, so there's no way that you can find it. And in the North Pole documentaries, they never break out a compass there either, nor do they give any star readings to prove that they actually are at the North Pole. So I'm quite skeptical of all the footage I've seen claiming to be at the North Pole or the South Pole, whether they're actually there. They just show a Garmin, which is GPS, Global Positioning System, which is created by the U.S. military. And I'm not trusting the U.S. military just to show me 90 degrees north latitude on a Garmin, and I believe that they're where they say they are. So yeah, I have some serious questions about why people can't go to the North Pole or to Antarctica and independently explore it. Pilots are also not allowed to go over there independently. They have some polar routes, they're called, but they don't go directly over the North Pole, and nor do they ever circumnavigate under the supposed ball from one side of Antarctica to the other. They always go around. You can check for yourself on all these flights. If the Earth was really a ball and they can survive the cold of outer space, they should be able to fly a straight route across Antarctica.
So the only way that a compass actually works is the way that the flat Earth is set up, or the way that a ring magnet that's found in loudspeakers is set up, where the North Pole is the only real pole, and it's the center. And the southern circumference, all the way around, is the southern pole, magnetic pole. And then that's a magnet that actually exists. The type of magnet they claim the Earth is doesn't exist. They say that there's a molten magnetic core, which is all speculation because they've only drilled 8 miles down, so they haven't even gotten through their theoretical crust, let alone to their theoretical outer mantle, inner mantle, outer core, inner core, and then this molten metal that's supposedly in the inner core is constantly shifting around in its molten state, so it's causing the North and South poles to constantly move. So this is another convenient explanation they give. So how come nobody can show proof of going to the supposed North or South Pole like they do in these documentaries and take out a compass and prove that they are in
find the magnetic north or magnetic south pole by walking in a circle and showing north to be in every direction. Never happens, I say, because they're never at the pole. They'll tell you it's just their complex ball, molten lava, whatever model that makes it so that they can't prove it. So in the flat model, Antarctica surrounds us, and as you can see, it is an ice wall and then an ice plateau once you climb on it. And early explorers like James Clark Ross and Captain Cook and the British ship Challenger and some other examples in the 1800s and before, they gave records of taking 50 to 60,000 miles to go around Antarctica, where on the ball model it's only 12,000 miles approximately at that line of latitude where they'd be. So they were taking 3 or 4 years in their trips. They were trying to find inlets into the ice, and they couldn't find it. And they also found themselves off of their reckoning more and more the farther south they went, which is exactly what you'd expect if you were thinking you were on a ball, and the lines of latitude would get smaller and smaller as you get closer to Antarctica. But in fact, you're on a flat Earth, so the lines of latitude actually get farther and farther apart, lines of longitude rather. And that's why they found themselves out of reckoning, and that's why it took so long to get around Antarctica without ever finding an inlet, is because it's not a tiny continent on the underside of the ball. It's actually a huge circumferential barrier all the way around us.
Lieutenant Charles Wilkes, commander of the United States Navy exploration expedition to the Antarctic in 1838, spent almost 4 years going around, and he was writing in his journal how every day he was sometimes up to 20 miles in less than 18 hours out of reckoning. And so they always have to chalk it up to water currents or some sort of thing like this, but they're consistently out of their reckoning because the flat Earth, of course, is much bigger in the southern so-called hemisphere than the ball Earth would be. So the maps that they're using are all assuming the ball Earth. They're flat maps, by the way. They use, it's called plain sailing, is the most common used navigation method, which is done assuming the water is a plane, as it actually is.
Yeah, and you also have, and this is another quote that I pulled off your site, a guy named William Carpenter. He says, "Yes, but we can circumnavigate the South easily enough," is often said by those who don't know. The British ship Challenger recently completed the circuit of the southern region indirectly, to be sure, but she was 3 years about it and traversed nearly 69,000 miles, a stretch long enough to have taken her 6 times around the globular hypothesis, which is interesting because you can then visualize someone trying to get around this island they have in their head, this big island of ice, this big continent of ice, this idea they have in their head, and they're trying to get around it by just going the same direction. And if you picture it in the flat Earth model, you can visualize how they would just be bumping into the edge all the way around until they got back to kind of their starting point, and then they'd go back up north and be like where they were. And to them, they think they went around a big continent, but they did exactly the opposite and went on the inside of a giant edge. And I thought that quote was pretty interesting.
People will usually come at you with, well, what about circumnavigation? That's one you learn in school. We can circumnavigate the globe, so it must be a globe. You can go all the way around it. So if the Earth was flat, you couldn't go around a flat Earth. But the flat Earth model, what we're looking at here is, imagine a disk with Antarctica being an ice ring all around it and the oceans being held in and the North Pole at the middle. So with this model, circumnavigation just means east to west, like a compass point, set it in the middle. You can trace a circle. And Magellan's journey, for instance, basically was that, with a few inlets and outlets along the way. All he did was go around from east to west, the flat Earth. This doesn't prove that you're on a globe or a flat Earth either way. It can go either way. So basically, the circumnavigation proof is not a proof at all. It could happen regardless of whether the Earth was flat or a ball.
The ships over the horizon, they say that when a ship is receding away from you, the hull disappears before the masthead, and it slowly goes up like that, as though it's going over the curve of the Earth. And that was one of Aristotle's first proofs that they used for the ball Earth. That was before telescopes, binoculars, or zoom cameras existed. Nowadays, you can test that for yourself. You watch any ship going away from you until it completely goes over the curve beyond the horizon where you can't see it. And then you take your zoom instrument, and you will be able to zoom completely back on the ship, hull and all the way back into view, proving that when something disappears beyond the horizon, it hasn't sunk below the curvature of a convex sphere. It has simply gone beyond your perspective as far as the law of perspective allows. So just depending on the strength of your instruments, your height, and the conditions of the atmosphere while you're watching, you'll be able to see a shorter or further distance. And when the sun is going away from us, as Crone was saying, we're not spinning. It is literally going away from us. And just like a plane or anything else, it starts to go down on the horizon, down, 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 until it completely disappears. Now, those planes that are doing that are not about to crash into the earth. They're not curving under the ball. Otherwise, you'd see the bottom of the plane. You don't see the bottom of clouds either. Clouds curving over. What you see is point perspective. Like any artist knows, everything converging to the one center point of wherever you're looking at that time. Just like in a narrow hallway, the edges, the sides come in to a point, the ceiling comes down to that point, and the floor rises up to that point. And that's just how our vision works. And that's why a boat going away from you seems to disappear over the curve of a ball. If you've been told it's a ball, then that's what you're going to believe. But if you get out a zoom camera and you zoom the entire thing back into focus, then you can see that's not what happened. And with the sun, as the sun is dipping down, you got to get a really good camera, but it can be done. And there are examples of this on YouTube. You can zoom it in, and the sun, which was either completely disappeared, half disappeared, you name it, on the horizon, will rise up on the horizon. The sun hasn't risen up. You've just changed your perspective by looking at it through a zoom camera.
Well, if the Earth is flat, I'm going to read this one because I wrote it down. How come we can't see South America from Australia?
Yeah, so the skeptics want to say that, well, if the Earth is flat, my eyesight should be infinite. And, well, your eyesight's not infinite, regardless of how good a telescope you fasten to it. The atmosphere is not transparent. You can imagine the haze over a road on hot, humid days. The same thing happens. All telescopes are going to blur out long before you can see, hundreds or thousands of miles like that. You can, however, see much farther than would be possible on a ball of 25,000 miles in circumference.
So that's not a disproof of the flat Earth that you can't see, thousands and thousands of miles. But you can, however, see hundreds of miles sometimes, like you said. And if you can, there's reports of being able to see almost 200 miles. At that distance, there should be like 4 miles of curvature. So people have seen things that you absolutely should not be able to see on a ball 25,000 miles in circumference.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you this one. I'm sure you saw this. The recent clip of this weatherman talking about the Superior Mirage, where somebody had filmed being able to see Chicago from Michigan, the Chicago skyline. And he was saying, you're not really seeing that. What you're seeing is a mirage, and I guess they called it a superior mirage, when clearly, in fact, what you were seeing was the coast or the skyline of Chicago. Did you see that clip?
I did, yeah. That photographer has been photographing several such horizon skyline views as well. That particular one, I think, was 60 miles away, and you can do the curvature formula and figures out to several hundred feet that it should be below the horizon, but it's not. There's many more. Mount McKinley's one good one in Alaska. People are able to see that, and we've got several photos on my forum of it from 130 miles away. Almost the whole thing should be beneath the horizon based on the ball formula, and it should be leaning back significantly if we're on a ball, but it's completely level, completely flat, and you can almost see the entire thing. The bottom part of the horizon will disappear, objects near the horizon will disappear in the distance. People will ask about that often, and that's just natural. If you watch a girl walking away wearing a dress, first you'll see her shoes disappear as she gets a quarter of a mile away, and then her ankles a half mile, and then it looks like a ghostly dress is just floating for a while, and then halfway up the dress is gone. And that's just perspective doing its thing, and you can see that happen. But again, the deniers, the baller skeptics, they'll come in and say, oh, see, I can't see the bottom of her legs, or, oh, I can't see the bottom of the boat. That means she's behind the ball.
But it's all perspective. Any artist knows this. If you know about point perspective, it's exactly how the horizon works. The vanishing line of our perspective. Just like if you look at a hallway, a long hallway, the walls on either side of you are going to tend towards the middle, and the ceiling and the floor are going to tend towards the middle vanishing point, and that's what you're looking at. That's what a sunrise and a sunset is, a moonrise and a moonset. That's what's happening with those ships over the horizon. That's what's happening with the girl walking away from you. It's all just perspective.
Yeah, I think it was 60 miles away, and he called it a mirage.
A mirage, exactly.
Now, a mirage is a genuine phenomenon that happens, but the picture is inverted when a mirage happens.
Exactly.
And the Chicago skyline was perfectly normal, and a mirage would you'd usually find it, well above the actual image, whereas this image is exactly where it should be, right on the horizon. If it was a mirage, it should be somewhere hazy up in the sky or something, but this image is right on the horizon, just as it should be.
Right.
For instance, on the Red Bull dive that Felix Baumgartner did that everybody has seen, if you notice, the outside cameras are clearly wide-angle lens, and then there's an inside cockpit camera that isn't. And as you're watching it from the outside cameras, you'll notice that the supposed curvature of the baller starts really early on, just as he's lifting off, and the exact same curvature stays exactly the same all the way up to the point where he's going to jump. So the curve is the same, but his altitude has risen by many, many miles. The reason the curve is the same, of course, is because it's a wide-angle lens effect. It's not actually the curve of the horizon. It just seems that way.
Right.
And that's proven by the inside camera, which, as the door opens, you can see the horizon out that inside camera. It has risen to the eye of the camera. As I said, on a ball Earth, you wouldn't open that camera and have the horizon right at eye level in front of you, no matter how big the ball was. That effect can only happen on a flat plane, and you can see in that dive shot that the inside camera, the horizon is completely flat. Mm-hmm. Then it goes to the outside, and you got a huge curve. But when you're looking at some of the amateur balloon footage, some of it's lens corrected and it's completely flat, and others, like the GoPro stuff, the horizon will fluctuate as the camera spins and tilts. The horizon will go convex and concave, but whenever it's still, it will level off at completely level, and you can see that the convex and concave the images are just a lens effect. It's obviously not the horizon shifting every 2 seconds as the camera jumps. Yeah. And when it's still, you can see all the way up, totally flat.
Yeah, I have a GoPro, so I'm very familiar with that fisheye lens, which, that's not going to be reliable for what we're trying to look at.
Are there, according to the Flat Earth research, does that then preclude the existence of other spheroid celestial bodies? Does that mean that all planets are flat, or are we the only sort of plate?
Right. Well, we're a plane, not a planet. So all they did was add a T to the end, and everybody bought it. But in reality, Earth is the only physical plane, and everything above us is just a light. So there is no spherical terra firma ball planets like Mars, Jupiter, and all these things that NASA presents us with. The moon landing was fake, and it's done here on Earth. The Mars footage is fake and then done here on Earth. All the CGI images you've ever seen of all these planets, you'll notice that there is no actual footage. Type in real planet footage or something along those lines in YouTube, and you'll not find a single real video of a planet. And when you look at planets through amateur telescopes, they just look like flat circular disks of light, just like stars. And in fact, for thousands of years, they were called stars. They're called the wandering stars, as they differ from the fixed stars in their relative motions only. The fixed stars stay completely fixed together in their constellations day after day, year after year, millennia after millennia, which is another proof that we're not on a spinning ball going all around the galaxy like they tell us, because Polaris, the North Pole star, stays exactly where it is, right above us, and all the other stars rotate in a dome-like planetarium shape eastward in a 24-hour cycle all around us. And the wandering stars, so-called, because they kind of wander their own unique path, but they're still in a general motion. They do a kind of a spirograph pattern around the sun. So, no, the sun, the moon, the stars, and the wandering stars that are now called planets are just light, and they light up the night sky. They give us calendrical time. They divide not only the night from the day, but the years and the months, etc. The word month comes from moon month, and it's the cycle is the same with the female cycle as well. So there's a lot of parallels between, as above, so below. That's where astrology comes from as well. When you propagate the spinning ball Earth model, then suddenly astrology, which was an ancient science of consciousness known to our ancestors, suddenly becomes like some stupid superstition, because how could the position of the stars over us have any significance? But if we are the only plane in existence and everything in the heavens truly does revolve around us, then that denotes a special importance to not only Earth, but to humans, the most intelligent of the intelligent designers' designs. If we're just, on the speck of God's fingernail in the corner of the universe, like NASA wants us to believe, then it's a very nihilistic, atheistic kind of view.
A planet doesn't look that much different than a star. They do have their own uniqueness. Some of them twinkle like a diamond, change all colors. Some of them look like an orb. Some of them look, like a lemon shape. Some of them look like a disco ball. There's a bunch of different things like that, but none of them look like spherical spinning ball planets like they show us in our textbooks or like NASA comes out with. They all just look like, even Saturn, they'll say, what about the rings of Saturn? Well, again, in NASA's photos, they clearly look like rings around a spherical planet. But when I look at Saturn, it just looks like kind of a halo of light extending out from a circle of light. Right. It doesn't necessarily look like a ring at all, and the ring, halo, whatever you want to call it, doesn't necessarily look like it's going around a three-dimensional spherical object. It just looks like a tiny dot of light. It's just a luminary. It really does not look like something you could set foot on, especially like Sirius. Like I've taken videos with my P900 camera. It's this new camera that came out. It's got the best optical zoom of any camera, so you can zoom in on the stars and you can see, very clearly something that's supposed to be trillions and trillions of miles away. I mean, I can see it pretty clearly with the 83 times zoom camera, and that's nothing. So first of all, I don't think those things are trillions of miles away, and using secants and plane trigonometry, they figure to be just a few thousand miles away, just like the moon and the sun, not trillions upon trillions as they're telling us.
If the Earth is in fact a sphere and is rotating, that would account for this oval shadow that it produces each and every lunar eclipse. Does that not prove this oval shadow that can be seen on the moon each and every lunar eclipse? Does that not prove, Eric, that the Earth is not only round but spherical?
Well, this is one of those proofs in quotations that I was telling you about. They claim that the shadow that goes across the moon during a lunar eclipse is actually the shadow of the ball Earth, and that's a proof that the Earth is a ball because you can see the ballish shadow eclipsing the moon. Now, in fact, it's been on record over 50 times in the past 2,000 years that there's been a lunar eclipse while the sun is still in the sky in the same vantage point that you can see an eclipse. Now, this makes their theory impossible because their theory maintains that the sun would be behind the ball Earth and the moon would be in a 180-degree syzygy, so they would be in a straight line, and that's the only way that you could get the ball Earth shadow on the moon from the sun, if the sun was lighting it from behind. But, as I said, the sun is in the sky many times while these eclipses are happening. You can clearly see them both, so the angle is not there. It's absolutely impossible that what we're seeing is the shadow of the Earth. And in fact, if you look at ancient astrology, ancient astronomy, you'll find that what does eclipse the moon is called Rahu, R-A-H-U, or the black sun. It's a third celestial body that they don't tell us about that is the same size as the sun and the moon that eclipses them. It's a dark body, and that's what causes eclipses, not the Earth's shadow.
If you look to ancient cultures all over the world, they claimed that there was a third celestial body, the same size as the sun and the moon, but it's a translucent dark body. They called it the black sun, or Rahu in Vedic astrology.
And so this is what the explanation has been for thousands of years. And then this new ball Earth shadow on the moon explanation came around, and they use it as a proof. But like I said, it's been proven that it couldn't possibly be that, because the sun and the moon are both in the sky in the same vantage point from somewhere on Earth 50 times plus, and it still happens today. So it couldn't possibly be this. Whether it's this black sun explanation or not, we need more evidence as far as I'm concerned. But this is what ancient societies, ancient cultures rather, said.
Like the model they show, the ball Earth model with a crust on the outside and the outer mantle and the inner mantle and the outer core and the inner core. Guess what? They've only ever dug 8 miles down into the crust, so they don't even know what's beneath that. It took them almost 30 years to get there, and they couldn't get any further in the Russian Kola Ultra Deep, it's called. So it's all speculation as to these layers of the ball Earth they claim exist, and it's the inner layer of molten magnetic core, whatever they claim creates the magnetism of the Earth. And so this is another funny thing. They claim that the core that we've never gotten to, so that can't be confirmed existed, causes a magnetic effect on the ball Earth, so that at one point at the top of the ball is a pole, and at the exact opposite point on the ball is an opposite magnetic pole. But this doesn't exist anywhere in nature. You can't find a sphere, and at one point on the magnetic sphere, it will cause another magnetic sphere to stick to it in that little point, and then then push away from the opposite point. It doesn't exist like that. Only bar magnets can do that. What do exist, however, are ring magnets, and those are shaped just like the flat Earth model, where the pole is in the middle, and then the opposite pole is actually every point along the circumference. So the magnetic explanation, which a lot of people will bring up, well, how does magnetism work if we're on a flat Earth? You know, the accepted model is that it's this spinning molten magnet stuff in the core that creates this kind of north-south ball magnet, which doesn't actually exist anywhere in nature. Yet the ring magnet, which is it's in loudspeakers and other things, that's the flat Earth model, and that actually does exist. So that's an actual magnet instead of an imaginary magnet like they claim exists. And we'll actually admit that I don't know what's under the flat Earth. We've only gone 8 miles down, and we haven't gotten to the bottom of the Pacific. All I know is, as far as we can tell, the water is completely flat, and the land is flat, other than hills, valleys, and mountains over a long period of space. There's no convex or concave curvature. It's totally flat. So when I tell you that I don't know, but NASA tells you they do know, NASA is just lying to you by telling you that they know what's beneath the Mariana Trench or what's beneath 8 miles down. I'm just sticking with the evidence. The Russian Kola Ultra Deep went 8 miles down, and they couldn't get any further. And the what's his name, Mike DeGruy, he went down in one of those deep submarine capsule things, and he found a whole nother layer of ocean underneath the ocean, which was super saline, and he couldn't go down in it with his submarine. He just bounced off of it, which is reminiscent of the Bible's Genesis first chapter, talking about dividing the waters from the waters with the firmament.
Yeah.
And this layer of ocean potentially could be, maybe that's what's under the Earth, so to speak, is this super saline layer of infinite or non-infinite ocean, and then the other oceans, and then the Earth is on top of that. And that's how the Bible and the Egyptian myth and a lot of creation myths say that, is that first there was the water, and then they pulled the land out from the water, and then out of the land came man and the animals.
Again, the word dome means that we have found that there is some sort of solid barrier out there beyond the Antarctic icing covering us, which we have not found. So I don't know that there's a dome. I don't know that there's a barrier, an edge, or if we live on an infinite plane. So I wouldn't say anything about a dome. All I know is that the Earth is flat and motionless, and they won't allow us to explore Antarctica, so we don't know how the flat, motionless Earth ends, whether there is an edge, a barrier like a dome, or if it's an infinite plane, or if there's other puddles beyond here, or it's open to speculation right now because they won't let us independently explore it. But what I don't like is a lot of these flat Earth researchers who are coming into this now, some are more genuine than others. A lot of them will say that it's definitely an infinite plane, and they'll name their channel after it, or they'll say it's definitely a dome, and their whole channel will be about being in an enclosed system, when neither of these people have any evidence that it's either. And so it's disingenuous to state as fact that we live under a dome or that it's an infinite plane or anything like this. And of course, this is what I expected when I started breaking this flat Earth information. They're not just going to let me do this. They're going to bring in their gatekeepers, like Alex Jones and like the others. They've got smaller gatekeepers for the flat Earth that they've brought in to distort the message. And they give fake flat Earth arguments, hoping that you'll reach them before you reach someone like me. And then you'll hear their stupid arguments saying that gravity's real, but the flat Earth disk is constantly rising. And that's what causes us to, things to fall. They'll give explanations like this, which to any sound thinking person will totally reject. And then they'll totally reject the entire flat Earth model based on these little bits of disinformation that are being given.
So we have time zones, the idea of time zones. Do not Eric, the existence of time zones. How can we have time zones if the Earth is flat? I mean, we should all be seeing the sun. I mean, if the Earth is not rotating on its own axis, then we should all be experiencing, the same daylight at the same time, shouldn't we?
The sun is not 93 million miles away, as we're told, nor is the Earth a ball spinning around it. In fact, the Earth is a flat plane, and the sun is a disk that spins over and around the Earth in circles every day. Same with the moon. If you can imagine the yin-yang sign, the Chinese yin-yang symbol is actually a symbol representing the sun and the moon's path over the flat Earth. So imagine the yin-yang spiraling in a circle. The sun, you can't see the sun all over the Earth from every point at all times, and time zones are caused by its motion over the flat Earth, over and around it. So every 15-degree demarcation point around the circle is 1 hour, and it will do this 24 times a day. So time zones are caused by the sun moving over and around the Earth, not by the Earth spinning around the Earth spinning, as they say.
Now that we're on the topic of the time zones, it would probably be good to segue into the seasons and how the seasons work on a flat Earth model, because at first I was so confused about how this could work, but then when I saw it all laid out, it made way more sense to me than the ball Earth model, and it was like I had an epiphany. Oh, duh. So maybe you can explain it to people.
Yeah, the ball Earth model has a flaw as well, that they say that winter happens when the Earth is actually closest to the sun. They have the Earth going around the Earth going around the sun in an ellipse fashion, and so the points at which it's closest to us, we actually have winter in most places over the Earth, which is weird. And it also doesn't work in their gravity model, where they say that gravity is keeping things spinning in circles. Sometimes it keeps things spinning in ellipses if they want it to, so they change the shapes and stuff all the time. On the flat Earth model, as I said, the sun is going from tropic to tropic, solstice to solstice. So starting at the winter solstice, the sun is at the Tropic of Capricorn, and it's making a circular journey over and around the circular flat Earth, with the North Pole in the center and Antarctica, the circumferential barrier all around it. The Tropic of Capricorn is at 23.5 degrees south latitude. The equator is in the middle. So after 3 months of circling around in a corkscrew pattern, slowly getting narrower as you go, and slowing down as well, so it keeps the same 24-hour pattern in its circle. You pass the equator during the equinox, and then you go narrower and narrower circles to the summer solstice, which is at the Tropic of Cancer at 23.5 degrees north latitude. And then the next 6 months it gets wider and wider circles as it makes a corkscrew journey back to the Tropic of Capricorn. So the moon has a similar journey, though it's a bit slower than the sun.
There is definitely midnight sun in Alaska, Scandinavian countries, and that happens. If there was it was a ball Earth, then we'd have midnight sun in our winter months in the South Pole. But I don't hear anybody going to Patagonia for the midnight sun.
That's right. Yeah, no, and they don't let you go to Antarctica to see it either. Though they claim it happens. If you go to timeanddate.com or something, during those times in which in the ball model Antarctica should be seeing 24-hour sunlight, they claim they are. But you can see dozens of videos on YouTube of the Arctic night sun, like you were saying, in Alaska and other places north of the Arctic Circle. You can see the sun for sometimes 72 plus, it depends where you are. You can see it for days and days without ever dropping below the horizon. The sun just kind of goes up and then comes down in a sine wave kind of arc around you. And it'll do that for days and never fall out of sight. But if you were on a spinning ball below 89 degrees north latitude, you'd have to be seeing through the ball to see to the sun for part of the spin. But you can actually see it down as far as like 65 degrees north latitude. So it's impossible that you could see this night sun effect in the Arctic on a ball. And though they claim it happens in Antarctica, you can't find any examples of it whatsoever. They have one video on YouTube of it, and it's a horrible 1-minute video of a bunch of cuts every couple seconds, cutting, and showing the sun, trying to make it look like the kind of the same effect as the Arctic one. But you can find legitimate Arctic ones with no cuts for days on end. People have taken the time lapse. So those ones are clearly real, and the ones that they claim happen in Antarctica that you'll never be able to verify are clearly fake.
Now, why is it that the sun appears to be at the same size when it's rising in the morning? It appears to be the same size at its highest point during the day, and then as it sets, it appears the same size. So wouldn't the size of the sun change if it's, passing over us? Wouldn't it get bigger and smaller? And would it also appear different in size depending on the season, seeing as how it would be further away in the winter and closer in the summer? Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
The sun does drastically change size depending on the video you're looking at.
Okay.
So, for instance, I'll put video to this audio later. Here you can see the sun slowly getting smaller and smaller as it gets further and further away, and it almost disappears into a pinprick before the light disappears. So sometimes you can see this happening where the sun is very big when it's overhead, and then as it sets, it clearly gets smaller and smaller due to perspective as it's getting further and further away from you. Now, in other videos, I'll show another one, as the sun gets closer to the horizon, you'll find it actually gets bigger. And so it depends on the amount of water that's in the atmosphere. So usually if it's a humid day or you're looking over the ocean, that's when you usually see the sun to be bigger, brighter, and magnified as it nears the horizon. In dry places, that's when you're going to see it shrink off into the distance. So you actually will see the sun do many different things. Sometimes you'll find it at its biggest point when it's directly overhead. Sometimes it's bigger on the horizon. Sometimes it's on the horizon and just a little pinprick. So it depends on various conditions how it's magnified.
Yeah, Neil deGrasse Tyson was just on the Anthony Cumia show saying how at the Burj Khalifa Tower in Dubai, if you go to the top of it, the sun sets 2 minutes later than at the bottom. And that proves that the Earth is a ball. What they're saying is that the Earth is a ball and the curved shape of the horizon is the sun is disappearing beyond that. And if you go up in the tower, you'll see the sun again for 2 more minutes and watch it set again. And that's proof that it's setting beyond a ball. Yet, if you go up there and you take video 360 degrees around you, you'll see the horizon's perfectly flat all the way around you, perfectly at eye level, and it rose with you at eye level right from the base of that tower to the top of that tower, as is only possible on a flat plane. A ball, no matter how big the ball is, the horizon would stay where it is, and you'd have to tilt your head looking down more and more as you rose to see it. And of course, it would also curve. The reason that you see the sunset slightly later from a higher position is simply perspective on flat surfaces. If you rise even higher than that, then you'll see even farther as well. They don't seem to mention that. When you go higher in altitude, you're able to see further along a flat plane, and that's all that's happening as you go higher. So the sun, when it's setting, is actually maintaining its altitude at about 3,000 miles above us, and it circles over and around the flat Earth. And so from your position, due to perspective, as it goes away from you, just like a row of street lamps as they're going away from you, the one closest to you seems very high overhead and then slowly dips down more and more to the horizon, or just like a long, narrow hallway where the floor rises up, the ceiling comes down, and the 2 walls come into a point right in the middle. that pyramid shape, that eye at the top of the pyramid. Another reason for that symbol is that's the way that our eyes actually see. Our eye sees in a pyramid type shape like that, and the sun setting down on the horizon like that is simply an element of perspective. And when it goes beyond the horizon, it's not setting beyond the curvature of a ball Earth. It's simply gone beyond the vanishing point of perspective from your point of view, which is what the horizon line is. It is not the curvature of the Earth, as you've been taught. You can think about it. If the limit of your perspective was the curvature of the Earth, and you saw, say, a ship disappearing over it, then you look to the left, the same amount of distance, and you look to the right, the same amount of distance. Well, there's no curvature there, but that's twice the distance as the ship in front of you that you think has disappeared beyond the curvature. And then to double check this, you can take out a pair of binoculars, and you'll see that that ship that disappeared beyond the horizon over the curvature of the Earth magically comes right back totally into view, hull and all. And that's because it's simply gone beyond your perspective, which you can bring back into view with technology or by gaining altitude, like by going up in a tower. So this is all just an element of perspective, and tricky Masonic magicians are trying to get you to think it's based on the curvature of the spinning ball Earth when it's nothing but perspective.
But you can prove that the light of the moon is totally different from the light of the sun. The effect it has on foods and plants is different. The actual temperature of the light is different. So if you're in the sun, of course, in the shade, it's cooler than in the sunlight. But in the moonlight, it's cooler in the moonlight than it is in the shade. So if you go in the moon shade, temperature goes up. So it couldn't possibly be reflected sunlight. Otherwise, it would be warm, just like the sunlight is warm. So it's casting its own light. The phases are a function of the moon itself, and it's provably a translucent flat object, not a opaque ball as they claim the moon is. If the moon was a ball, first of all, you'd be able to see different faces from different areas on Earth. So if you're at the Arctic or the equator or the Antarctic, you should be seeing different features because you're looking at a different face of the moon from there. However, no matter where you are on Earth, you'll see exactly the same face, the same man on the moon, the same rabbit will always be there, but it'll be tilted 360 degrees at various inclinations because the moon actually turns like a wheel as it goes around us. One of the ball Earth proofs they try to point to is they say in the northern hemisphere the moon is always right side up, and in the southern hemisphere it's upside down. And then they'll show you a picture of it right side up in the north and upside down in the south and say, case closed, the Earth's a ball. But in fact, you can, and people on my forum have taken pictures, and time-lapse shows that the moon is actually rotating like it's a disk. Not like it's a sphere rotating, as they claim, but like a disk just rotating 360 degrees over the course of a day. It's like a wheel kind of rolling over and around the flat Earth. That's actually how ancients portrayed it in Egypt and other cultures. They had the sun and the moon as chariots or drew them as wheels as they revolve over and around the Earth.
But the one thing that I haven't been able to overcome is people that insist, I've seen the curvature of the Earth.
Have they? The only time that we ever see curvature is in NASA's photos or videos that they're giving us, which are clearly CGI. When you're in a plane, the horizon rises to your eye level, and some people saying they might have seen the curvature at 35,000 feet out a plane window have to take into account the curved glass and the fact that the horizon is at your eye level. Now, if the Earth was a ball, no matter how big it was, it would be well below your eye level at 35,000 feet. It would remain where it was, the horizon, and as you rose up, you'd have to look down and down further the higher you rose. But you find that doesn't happen at all. You can rise straight up in an airplane at as high an arc as you can, keep your eyes fixed on the horizon the whole way up, and it's going to be rising right up to your eye level all the way. That's only consistent with a flat plane. So people may see curvature in wide-angle lens photography, the curve of the window, it's a very slight curve. Most of it is just confirmation bias. They're looking at a clearly flat horizon, and they may see some little curve of the windows, or they're seeing a fisheye lens and not equating it as such, and claiming they've seen the curvature. But take another look and you'll see that the horizon's always flat no matter where you are.
What's your take on stuff like that? When people bring up, well, look, you know what, we have GPS, and you're saying that the Earth is not a globe, but it's a global positioning. When we talk about HAARP, and HAARP is supposed to be bouncing off an atmosphere. So what does all that stuff mean to you? Or does it mean anything? Or like I said, is it all just a distraction not worth talking about?
Back before they claimed that satellites existed, they already had advanced communication radio technologies spanning most of the Earth, with LoRaN and other military technologies, as well as ham radio and whatnot. So the idea that we need to have these satellites spinning around, geostationary satellites out there in orbit, apparently moving at 16,000 miles per hour to keep up with the relative spin of the ball Earth beneath it, supposedly, and that this is an efficient and worthwhile way of using communication. All GPS is done through land-based towers, and things like Google Earth are taken with high-altitude planes, and most of them are just done with cars on street level.
Street level, yeah.
You don't need to have anything out there in outer space shooting pictures. You don't need anything in outer space bouncing radio signals, as they claim GPS is doing as well. Everything can be easily explained better through land-based technologies. For instance, satellites, they're supposedly in the thermosphere. The metals that they're made of should melt in the temperatures that they claim are happening in the thermosphere, as well as the fact that they claim satellites, space stations, astronauts, whatever, up in outer space just gets to a certain point and is able to just float indefinitely now. Unlike anything, you or I could ever try to send up. Every amateur rocket, every amateur balloon, everything that ever has been sent up comes right back down. But NASA and these space agencies, somehow they're able to send things up which at a magical altitude, which you can't find anywhere because they don't want to tell you where the supposed altitude is, but it must be somewhere between 30 and say 200 miles, because after that they claim that they pop out into the vacuum of infinite space where gravity doesn't affect them and they're able to just float around. And that's where these satellites are, just floating around up there. Not just floating though, they're in this geosynchronous orbit with the Earth, so they're actually shooting at 16,000 miles per hour, but maintaining the exact same position relative to the spinning Earth at all this time while it's going on, you see. Now, did you know that satellites were actually invented by Arthur C. Clarke, the science fiction author?
I didn't know that.
They shortly became science fact after that. The geostationary satellite, look it up. It was created by a science fiction author. And then within a decade, NASA claims to have sent a real one up there. And ever since then, that's where we get all our communications from. Satellite radio and all this stuff. They claim it's coming from these impossible metal things up there, 20,000 plus of them just spinning around. We can't see any of them. Well, actually, people claim to see them, right? I see a satellite. I see the space station. All anyone can see is moving lights, and who knows, like I said, who knows what these moving lights are? Orbs, stars, planes, UFOs. What they aren't, though, is floating astronauts and space stations and satellites. They're provably, those things are provably impossible. And you wouldn't be able to see them with your bare eyes anyway. Something hundreds of miles up in the atmosphere that's smaller than the size of a bus, as if you could see that.
Everything is done ground-based. Like you said, they've got fiber optic cables going across the oceans. They've got cell towers set up everywhere. So even GPS is just triangulated cell phone towers. Satellites are not necessary for anything that we do. You look at TV dishes, almost none of them are facing more than 45 degrees upwards because they're receiving signal from a ground-based tower. If we were actually receiving signals from these geostationary satellites hundreds of miles up, then most TV dishes should be pointing straight up all over the world.
That's true. Never thought about that. Now, why are ships in the middle of the ocean, far from land, using then if satellites are not real?
Right. Well, long before there was GPS, military had systems like LoRaN and DECA, and these are ground-based navigation systems that they were using for decades, and they work just fine. So, I mean, this kind of propagation has been working long before the supposed advent of satellites.
These craters are what look to be like craters. What are they then?
Yeah, so there's things that they call craters, which are holes in the Earth, like a bowl shape. And then there's little edges kind of up above the rest of the Earth around them there. So in one way, it looks like it could have been caused based on an impact from above. Though another way it could be is, say, like a gas bubble from below, and that same kind of shape could be the resulting shape from some sort of phenomenon happening from below just as well.
Like a sinkhole.
Like a sinkhole. And if it was from from, say, a burning rock from outer space, there should be huge, I mean, the rock itself should still be there if it caused that big of a depression, and there should also be huge chunks of it everywhere. Yet none of these supposed crater sites have anything of the sort. No big ball sitting in a hole, or even gigantic shards that we can still look at. Only, again, little pieces that they claim, oh, this is a meteorite, just like they claim the moon rocks. And same with the craters on the moon. If you look at the moon with your own eyes or with a telescope, there are potch marks of some kind there. But it's a foregone conclusion to say that they are craters formed during meteorite collisions. I mean, this is just an explanation that you've come up with. It's a possible explanation, but there's no physical evidence for that. None of us have ever seen a rock come from space and collide with the Earth, make a huge explosion, and then show us the rock sitting there so that we can verify that, yep, that was a big-ass rock that just came from outer space. It doesn't exist. We don't actually have that physical evidence to prove that such a thing exists.
So what do we see around the world? These lights that we saw in Russia a few years back and Arizona a few weeks ago, what are these?
Well, we've got shooting stars. Like I said, stars aren't actual terra firma. So when you see a light shoot from somewhere to somewhere else, it's simply that. It's simply a light shooting. It's not a rock in outer space coming somewhere.
No, but the ones in Russia that actually broke school windows and it almost felt like an explosion.
Right. And then you've got these ones where you can see mostly from Russia, it seems like, from dashboard cams, you'll see these burning balls of something coming. And yeah, they've even crashed windows and something. These, I think, are some sort of military thing that they're shooting to make us believe that meteorites exist, because they're always coming down at an angle like they've been shot from a plane. If meteorites existed and we were on a spinning ball Earth, then meteors should be shooting in every single direction possible. Not always from the exact same direction coming down onto the Earth. There should be meteorites that go upwards and ones that go diagonally upwards and ones that go horizontal and every other type of way. But we don't see that. So I'm quite skeptical of meteorites or asteroids or any sort of thing that they claim is up there floating around and comes down here and destroys dinosaurs, their other myth. They like to use their myths in conjunction like that.
Two more questions. I'm sorry, finish your statement.
So as far as the Russian ones, I would tend to think those are some sort of military experiment, some sort of weapon or something like this. Because you don't see them all over the world, you just see them there. It seems like it might be something they're working on. And the craters, not sure what those are formed from, but again, not seeing the evidence that they're from rocks falling from the sky. And for shooting stars, they say that those are comets, or that's another one. They say comets or whatever are asteroid rock formations that circle around us every so many years. But if we're spinning around the sun and the sun's spinning around the galaxy and all these motions are happening, why would comets have regular revolutions that we would see in such a cosmology? If the Earth was actually making all of those motions, we shouldn't ever come up across the same comets again. That makes more sense in a geocentric cosmology where everything in the heavens is revolving around us so that it could return at a regular time, like Halley's Comet or something like that.
In the mid-1800s, a guy named Leon Foucault started swinging pendulums and putting little pins at the end, and he used a ball and socket joint so that the pendulum was able to swing in a circle, and claimed that that's the Earth moving underneath the pendulum. And nowadays in museums all over the world, this stupid trick is still being used where they put a pendulum and and the modern day ones are computer run. They're not even like real pendulums, but an actual pendulum, and it would all be determined based on how you start the motion. There's no way to not give some slight lateral bias at the beginning of starting a pendulum in motion. And so sometimes the pendulums would swing way too fast, sometimes they'd swing too slow, sometimes they'd swing the opposite direction, sometimes they wouldn't swing at all. But these pendulums are being used all over the world now as proof that the Earth is spinning underneath them.
So maybe you could, debunk the Coriolis effect or elaborate on it further from where you're coming from.
Yeah,
another supposed ball Earth proof is that in the northern hemisphere, sinks, drains, toilets all spin one direction, and in the southern hemisphere, they spin the other direction. And this is proof that the Earth is a spinning ball, once again. However, you can find, even within your own household sometimes, drains will drain in opposite directions, let alone opposite hemispheres. So there's, you can see videos on YouTube of people doing this trick at the equator. They'll set up a sink, and then they'll say, this is the equator. They'll be in Ecuador or something, and then they'll have the water will go down straight, and then they'll walk a few paces, and like, okay, now we're in the northern hemisphere, and the water will go one way, and then they'll fill it up again and go down in the southern hemisphere, do it again, it goes the other way. Everybody oohs and ahs, and they give a little tip to the demonstration and move on to their next tourist destination. What is happening is that the water will drain based on either the shape of the basin or the direction that the water is flowing in originally. So this trick is done by just when you fill the water in, you fill it so that it's already spinning in one direction before you pull the plug. And you always have to quickly pull the plug, otherwise it'll always look like it goes straight down.
Science with a capital S for you right there.
Exactly, yeah. So, I mean, you can test this. There's videos debunking this on YouTube. People have found drains going both directions within their own household. And so now it's just yet another lame excuse trying to prop up a dying model.
Who are going to go look this stuff up, you might want to avoid the Flat Earth Society because they seem to be controlled opposition. You have a post about that, how the Flat Earth Society, the official group, they purposely sound crazy. They purposely don't answer things correctly. And when you trace back some of the people who are involved, they are Masons as well. So it seems like they might have this group set up to look stupid. Maybe avoid that.
Exactly. The Flat Earth Society was set up after the International Flat Earth Research Society was set up as the controlled opposition to bring people away from that society. Charles K. Johnson, who ran that society, he had his house burned down and all of his flat earth material was burned in the fire, and he claimed to his dying day that it was done by a NASA agent who also tried to murder him. And so, the Flat Earth Society, what they do is they mix a bunch of false flat Earth arguments in so that people who are considering the flat Earth and trying to research it, they'll instantly come upon the Flat Earth Society material because it's at the top of all the search engines. And they'll have false arguments like, instead of saying that gravity doesn't exist, as we got into a little bit, they'll say gravity exists, but it's explained by the flat Earth disk constantly rising up 9.8 meters per second. And so, you can imagine, instead of you falling, the flat Earth is rising up, and that's what happened.
Right.
But again, this is a silly argument. If that was the case, then sustained flight would be impossible, and the flat Earth would be rising up into planes and helicopters and stuff crashing into them. So they present an easily refutable argument like this, and then well-meaning researchers trying to look into the flat Earth find their frequently asked questions that has these bad answers, and then they just think, oh, well, this is ridiculous. And they also they make the whole thing into this big satire, and they address it cynically. So if you read some of their threads, they don't keep a serious research kind of attitude. They're always off the cuff, trying to be witty and funny all the time. So the whole thing is just made into a mockery. Yeah. They even made a mockumentary called In Search of the Edge, and they'd show it to people in public schools. They'd show it to kids, and then afterwards they'd ask them if they believed it. And then if the kids believed it, they'd then give these worksheets showing why it was wrong and that the Earth definitely isn't flat, and here's why, and then they'd start a big ball Earth unit based on it. So the Flat Earth Society has been involved in these kind of fake flat Earth arguments and documentaries and everything from the get-go up until today. So so steer clear of the Flat Earth Society and come on over to the International Flat Earth Research Society.
Yeah, just like Alex Jones makes conspiracy theorists seem crazy, they have an organization set up to make flat earthers seem crazy. So it's definitely worth a mention because I didn't want people to go there and then get turned off. Like you said, it's usually the first thing they see.
Yeah.
Now, what is the Flat Earth Society but a controlled opposition organization that's been set up for decades to control the flow of information
information regarding the flat Earth, so that when people find out that the Earth is flat and motionless, and they look it up and they try to find, is there any organizations or leaders or anyone, in this movement, they find the Flat Earth Society with their Freemasonic leader telling them a bunch of fake flat Earth facts to actually deter neophytes from the subject. So you get Leo Ferrari going on TV with a big boulder every time saying, I've just went to the edge of the flat Earth and I almost fell off, but luckily this rock here was here to save me. I held on to it. Most of my crew went over, but I'm here to tell you that the Earth is indeed flat. And he'd start an interview like this and carry on. He might throw in a couple actual valid proofs of the flat Earth, and then, that's it. And anyone who sees the show has now been taught that flat Earth is taken satirically, even by the big leaders in the movement. Nowadays, now that flat Earth resurgence has come back, we've got new shills in the movement, new controlled opposition, and they're doing the same thing. They're mixing in a bunch of fake arguments or a bunch of nonsense, other arguments, other non-flat Earth related things to throw the argument, into la-la land, so nobody's going to pay attention anymore. And then when you expose them for doing this, they come back at you and tell you that's what you're doing. So that's what we've got now, is this big rift in the flat Earth community between the controlled opposition, much of which was set up before I came along in the first place, and now that I've exposed that and come in with legitimate flat Earth material that's really taking traction, now we've got a new wave of shills that are coming in to try and detract from the new wave of flat Earth revelation that's going on.
If the Earth was flat, why wouldn't the Americans' enemies blow the whistle? Why would they maintain this conspiracy?
Well, first of all, Russia and America or any other statist nation are not enemies at the highest levels. They're all friends and they're all Freemasons, and usually members of other secretive organizations as well. So the idea that America and Russia are enemies is just like the idea that Macho Man Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan are enemies, but in reality we know that's fake. And the space programs all over the world are fake. The French program's fake, the Russian program's fake, NASA's fake, the new Japanese and Chinese programs are terribly fake. If you take a look at some of their images, they're much worse than the NASA ones. They're even easier to debunk than the NASA images. So these space programs are just a way to fleece the populations from their tax money. NASA's got hundreds of billions of dollars in their pockets to give us crap CGI photos and brainwash the whole world. So the fact that there's space agencies all over the world that are doing this now doesn't actually mean anything, because they're all part of the deception anyway. Anyone selling you a spinning ball Earth is leading you up a creek without a paddle.
That they're official. And what about JAXA and RASA? What about the Russians? I mean, the Russians, if the Americans didn't go to the moon, the Russians surely would have called them on it. And what about the Japanese space and the Chinese space agencies? They couldn't all be lying, could they? So people have no idea of the depth of the conspiracy. They have no idea about Freemasonry, for instance, which is the largest and oldest secret society in the world, over 5 million members in almost every country in the world. This exists and has existed for hundreds of years and is based on a hierarchical, compartmentalized system of degrees where people swear blood oaths every degree up that they will never divulge the secrets of this organization. So, I mean, this is a reality. This is the world you live in. It's run by secret societies, and most people have no idea about that. So you tell them, hey, the Earth is flat. They're like, well, and we didn't go to the moon. Oh, you couldn't lie to that many people. They couldn't get away with a lie that big. How many times do you hear that one? Yep. People aren't aware of how many huge lies have already been gotten away with and are gotten away with every day.
But why do they continue to say, we have so many other problems? Why are you focusing on this distraction?
Well, if they haven't looked into it at all, I can see how they would think that way. And I kind of thought that way years ago as well. That, well, it's just the shape of the Earth. What does that matter? Does it really matter whether it's this shape or that shape? So if you think of it on that level, then sure, it seems insignificant and it seems like it could be a waste of time, even if it was true. But if you think of it a little deeper than that, and you think of it as being the most fundamental lie, is where we are, what we're doing here, the Earth beneath our feet, the lights in the sky above us, what they actually are. And if we've been lied about all of these, as well as the Big Bang and evolution and the way that we supposedly got here and the purpose we may or may not have in this nihilistic cosmology that they've presented with us, it becomes a big deal. And when you look at the potential for a truth like this, a truth that has been suppressed for 500 500 years now, the flat earth truth. If that gets out and it is shown that every government, every university, every pundit, every television station is lying knowingly and censoring this truth, what happens when it actually gets out? The kind of restructuring of society and the system that truthers are looking for, that people know we need, is what can happen and what will happen and what must happen if this truth gets out, because this is huge. It is the truth. I guarantee anyone who's never heard of this before, look into the flat earth. The earth is flat, just like it appears on the horizon. The earth is motionless, just as you feel motionless. Everything in the sky revolves around us, just as it appears if you look up and use your own eyes, your own senses. Everything that your senses tell you is what's happening. But you've been fed a false system. You've been shown CGI images with a ball earth with a horizon that curves. You've been shown more CGI images with a ball earth that spins. You've been shown planets that spin like billiard balls around each other in many different directions at many different speeds simultaneously. You've been shown all these things in CGI format. You've had Freemasons lie to you and tell you they've seen it for themselves, but you've never seen it for yourself. You've just been lied to and shown pictures, and you believe those. It's not science. Science, in fact, shows that the earth is flat and motionless, and there are hundreds upon hundreds of proofs and experiments that have been repeated throughout history for hundreds of years, but you haven't been taught them in school because they don't want you to be taught that in school. They show you a spinning globe on your first day and tell you that gravity keeps water and buildings and people stuck to the bottom of that thing, and they repeat it until you believe it, your parents believe it, your grandparents believe it. 500 years ago, people were believing it. They even started trying to get people to believe it thousands of years ago, but it didn't pass until about Copernicus in 1500s when this really started to take shape. So the reason that some of the pseudo-truthers, so to speak, or just mainstream sheeple don't want this to get out and say that it's a distraction is because they don't know how far-reaching the implications of a truth this deep actually surfacing would be. It's like holding a balloon underwater. When you let go, that thing's just going to rush to the surface. The water's going to go flying, and that's what we need. It's exactly what we need. So that's what I'm working towards doing.
People often say, well, what does it matter whether the earth is flat or a ball? It doesn't affect my life in any way, which is really an ignorant statement, because it's the most fundamental thing. What's beneath your feet, what's over your head, what is this reality about? To claim to not care or think that it's not important in any way to figure out what's really going on. Well, there you go. I mean, that just proves what they've done. They've turned people into zombies that can actually say that it doesn't matter what reality is. How does that change my life? Well, if reality doesn't change your life, then what does that say about your life?
So as a guy who makes podcasts for a living and is consumed with mixed martial arts, what do I care whether or not the earth is round or flat?
Eric?
Well, if you care about truth, then you should absolutely care. And if you care about your existence and humanity's existence, then you should care where we came from and what we're living on. And like I said, it's the biggest lie possible. So when I hear this all the time too, people say, what does it matter if it's flat or a triangle or a square? I don't care what shape the earth is that I'm living on. What a waste of time. Yeah, it's not about the shape. It's about the lie. It's about the fact that we've been lied to for 500 years and we're still being lied to, and they're fleecing us of money and they're fleecing us of our actual purpose here on earth and where we come from. Do you think that you came from a big bang explosion accident of matter and then humanity and consciousness and life just randomly somehow evolved out of that explosion? Is that the cosmology that you've chosen to believe in? If it is, then it's very important, because that's absolute nonsense, and you've chosen to believe in a metaphysics and a physics, which are fairy tales. And if you don't think that's important, I don't understand you. I don't understand how you could think that that is not important, to know the truth of the earth, where we live on and where we've come from.
Sure. No, I can understand that.
It's not that they don't care. It's that they don't know that it's true. And even if it is true, they can't see how deep this goes. So they don't understand why it's even relevant or important. The shape of the earth doesn't seem that important until you really expound upon the deepness of this conspiracy and how far-reaching it is. And it's much more than just the shape of the earth. I mean, they're lying not only about the shape of the earth, but how much earth there is. Certain structures that ancient man claimed to have been on this Earth that are now wiped off of the libraries. You can barely find any information on things such as Mount Meru and the supposed whirlpool surrounding it that causes the ocean's tides. These are interesting concepts that were written about, over 500 years ago, but nowadays you can't even find existing copies of some of these books. Invencio Fortunato, for instance, is one of these lost books. They've got all these lost books that are known about and written about, but the original source themselves now are, lost to ancient history, a lot of them in Alexandria and whatnot. So we're trying to recover lost history here. More than 500 years ago, the entire world knew that it was flat and motionless, but in the past 500 years, all information about this has been systematically done away with, so it's really difficult to come across it.
Yeah, our eyes and experience tell us the Earth is flat and motionless, and everything in the sky revolves around us. But when we cease to believe our own eyes and experience, we have to prostrate ourselves at the feet of these very pseudoscientists who are blinding us, treat them as experts, astronomical priests who have special knowledge only they can access, like the Hubble telescope. So by brainwashing us of something so gigantic and fundamental, it actually makes every other kind of lesser indoctrination a piece of cake. Earth being the flat, fixed center of the universe around which everything in the heavens revolves gives a special importance and significance not only to Earth, but to us humans, the most intelligent among the intelligent designers' designs. By turning Earth into a spinning ball thrown around the sun and shot through infinite space from a godless Big Bang, they turn humanity into a random, meaningless, purposeless accident of a blind, dumb universe. So it's like trauma-based mind control, beating the divinity out of us with their mental manipulations. People are always asking, why do they do this? Other than the obvious profit margin motive, NASA being the biggest black budget black hole in existence, sucking in over $30 billion taxpayer money for the fake moon landings alone. Nowadays, hundreds of billions of dollars, and not just NASA, but RASA and all the other fake space organizations around the world giving CGI images for hundreds of billions of dollars. So this modern atheist Big Bang heliocentric globe Earth chance evolution paradigm spiritually controls humanity by removing God or any sort of intelligent design and replaces purposeful divine creation with haphazard random cosmic coincidence. And so by removing Earth from the motionless center of the universe, these Masons have moved us physically and metaphysically from a place of supreme importance to one of complete nihilistic indifference. If the Earth is the center of the universe, then the ideas of God, creation, and a purpose for human existence are resplendent. But if the Earth is just one of billions of planets revolving around billions of stars and billions of galaxies, then the ideas of God, creation, and a specific purpose for Earth and human existence become highly implausible. So by surreptitiously indoctrinating us into their scientific materialist sun worship, not only do we lose faith in anything beyond the material, we gain absolute faith in materiality, superficiality, status, selfishness, hedonism, and consumerism. If there's no God and everyone's just an accident, then all that really matters is me, me, me. So they've turned Madonna, the mother of God, into the material girl living in a material world. Their rich, powerful corporations with their slick sun cult logos sell us idols to worship, slowly taking over the world while we tacitly believe their science, vote for their politicians, buy their products, listen to their music, watch their movies, all sacrificing our souls at the altar of materialism.
Touche, my man.
It's a big deception. I'd say it's the biggest cover-up and conspiracy in history. We've been completely deluded for 500 years.
If you want to control a population, do you think you go and you tell them exactly the truth about everything that's going on in the Earth that they're living in and how they came to be and what their place is in the cosmos? Do you think it's a good idea to tell them exactly what it is? Or would it be a better idea to tell them the exact friggin' opposite of what it is and make them believe that, so that it disempowers them, so that it turns you into the authority, so that all their information about space and the planets and cosmology and where we came from and where we might be going and who humanity really is comes from these few people: Neil deGrasse Tyson, Brian Cox. You get your little spokespeople, and they are now the purveyors of all truth off of this flat world that we live on, trying to tell us otherwise. So firstly, it sets up your Copernicus and your Newton and your Galileo and all of these Masons throughout history as being the saviors of science, as being the most trusted authorities, as being the initiators of Renaissance and starting this whole new way of correct thinking. So obviously, if you're going to control people, people, you have to lie to them. What's the biggest lie you could possibly lie to them about? This is it.